Hello and good morning, everyone. Wow. Welcome to the Egypt Development Policy Dialogue event. I'm very happy and excited to be standing here introducing this first event happening at AUC. And I want to start by telling you what kind of event this is, because it's not a standard lecture and it's not a standard conference. Actually, a few months ago, we posed the question to our students, a hard question, one that does not have an easy answer, and that the most serious development economists are still debating. And this question is, can Egypt close its gender gap in work through its current reforms, or does something more fundamental need to change? We asked students to research that question, engage with the data, read the literature, and write a serious academic essay arguing a position, and they did. What you will hear today is the best of that work in debate form, with the audience as both witnesses and participants, because we believe that ideas are not just meant to sit in a document, they're meant to be shared and tested. This is not the first time we have worked with the ERF and the World Bank to bring student research into a public conversation. And each time we do, it confirms something we believe deeply, that the most important voices in this debate are often the youngest ones. This event sits at the heart of what our department stands for, and we believe that economics education is not just about training students to model and measure, it's about training them to ask the right questions, to read the evidence honestly, and to have the courage to argue a position in public and defend it under scrutiny. Today's students have done exactly that. Before we begin, I want to warmly welcome our distinguished guests. We're delighted to have Dr. Samer Atallah, our Associate Dean of Graduate Studies and Research at the Onsi Sawiris School of Business. We're also honored to have with us Mr. Stéphane Guimbert, the World Bank's Country Director for Egypt, Yemen, and Djibouti. And we're grateful to have Dr. Ra'ed Safadi, the Managing Director Designate, whose leadership at ERF has made this collaboration not just possible, but genuinely productive. And we're especially pleased to have Professor Nagla Riz, Professor of Economics at the Mohammed Shafiq Gabri Department of Economics, who will be joining us later as our expert discussant. To the students whose essay formed the intellectual foundation of this event, thank you. And whatever happens in this room today, you have already done the hard part. You thought carefully about a difficult question and you put your thinking on a paper. And to everyone in this room, students, faculty, guests, colleagues, you're not just an audience, you are participants. You will be asked to vote, to think, and possibly to change your mind. So let's begin. I would like to invite our Associate Dean, Dr. Samer Atallah, to provide a few opening words.
Sabah al-khair. Good morning. Thank you, Dina. Always lovely to start the day with young faces. So, welcome to AUC New Cairo campus. Stefan, this become your second home now. I think we're expecting Dr. Ra'ed anytime soon. He's okay. He's online. So Ra'ed, welcome. Welcome to Cairo and to Egypt. I believe this is your first public engagement. Congratulations on being the ERF Managing Director. Personally, as an ERF Fellow, I would like to welcome you to ERF. And obviously, I want to welcome my friend, colleague, mentor, Nagla. And also, we have a distinguished guest as part of the Sawiris lectureship, Harold Ehrlich, coming from University of Chicago, who's visiting us in the past 2 weeks. So students, colleagues, welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the Onsi Sawiris School of Business Beyond Job Creation and Closing the Gender Gap. Yesterday, we had a very important event in the school. It's called the Top Employers event, where we gather our top employers who hire our graduates, whether undergraduate or graduate students, and we hear from them about our students, mostly positive things, and we hear from them mostly what should we do to better serve the job market. And my conclusion from this 2-hour meeting with employers from private sector, employers from fast-moving consumer goods, from the financial sector, I don't know if there were NGOs or government, is that more and more, and this is for you students, curriculum is becoming less and less important. What is becoming more and more important is, number 1, character, number 2, agility, number 3, technical savviness. So this, what we're doing here today, is kind of part and parcel of preparing you for the future job market. It is what we call in the School of Business experiential learning. So you are basically learning outside the classroom, learning not through lecturing, but learning through doing things that are applicable to your economy, to your real life, and challenging you to provide solutions to chronic problems that have been there since God knows when. So we rely on you to apply the knowledge that you got in real life issues, come up with creative solutions, because people in my age, and I hate to say that, their level of creativity kind of widens down as they age. So your creativity matters a lot, your agility matters a lot, and I'm sure, I hope, I pray that you're learning very quickly how to be tech savvy. The tools that are here today are not to substitute your brain power, but to supplement, to empower your brain power. So this is an important event in the sense that we care about learning outside the classroom, what we call experiential learning. We want you to be leading the thought, and we have experts here to respond to you. We want you to provide evidence, to provide ideas, and actually we want you to be future thought leaders, because you guys are going to be in a position, if we look at the alumni profile of ONSI Sawira School of Business, there are leaders, whether in private sector, whether in government, whether in NGOs. So I don't need to be someone who gambles, but I'm pretty much sure that a good bunch of you sitting here will be a future leader in this country. So get trained to be a thought leader into providing solutions to chronic problems. This event also falls into one of the very important themes of our school, which is economic development. We claim that we are a knowledge hub in 3 areas: economic development, entrepreneurship, and responsible business. Economic development falls importantly to us because we are in a country on the path of development. We have expertise in the area of development, so it's very important for us to produce knowledge and to disseminate knowledge related to economic development. One of the very critical challenges of economic development is obviously the female labor force participation. One of the critical challenges that is chronic not only to Egypt, but to the whole region. It's one of the things that disappoint me on daily basis, that we still have this very poor economic participation of women in the economy in general and in the labor market particularly. So the topic is, can Egypt close the gender gap through current reforms, or do you need deeper structural transformation? It's a very, to me personally, this is a topic that I'm very, very passionate about. As an economist, I believe in incentives. If we put the right incentives, people will participate in the labor market. But as somebody who lived in Egypt and lived abroad for a good part of my life, I understand that context matters, culture matters. So I'm relying on you to set the debate today and to tell us what we should do about this critical and chronic problem. My students, when I used to teach economic development, they really got bored of me of repeating one sentence. Nothing will turn the fate of this country and this region except women economic and social empowerment. So let's do it today. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Dr. Samer. We'll now move to Dr. Raed, who's joining us on Zoom today. Dr. Raed, please.
Thank you very much for this lovely and warm introduction. Thank you, Dina, for the welcome notes. Thank you, Samer, also for the wishes. We will resume our cooperation, but now I'm going to be wearing different shoes, starting in June. It is really a great pleasure for me to join you today, even if online. I have to apologize for this. Inshallah, this will soon change. I am especially pleased to speak after Dina and Samer, our hosts and partners who have opened this session, and to add ERF's voice to this important conversation on evidence, policy relevance, and inclusive development. And I'm going to just echo what Samer just said. Now, this dialogue brings together three things that matter deeply for Egypt's future: rigorous research, serious policy debate, and the energy of young people. Each is important on its own, but when they come together, they create something more powerful: the possibility of turning evidence into action and ideas into change. At the Economic Research Forum, our mission is rooted in evidence and open debate. We believe that development progress begins with clear diagnosis, honest conversation, and the courage to ask difficult questions. Today's event reflects that spirit. It is not simply a discussion about women's work. It is a discussion about development potential of Egypt, Egypt's social progress, and the kind of economy Egypt wants to build. We are really very proud to co-host this event with the World Bank, a leading global development institution, and the American University in Cairo, a cornerstone of education and research in the region. This partnership matters because the challenges before us cannot be addressed by research alone, or by policy alone, or by institutions working in isolations. They require bridges between evidence and decision-making, bridges between universities and policy institutions, and bridges between today's leaders and the generation that will carry this agenda forward. The issue before us is both urgent and deeply consequential. Closing Egypt's gender gap in work cannot be reduced to creating more jobs. It requires us to ask a more fundamental question: what must change so that women can access work, remain in work, and progress through work on equal terms? Now, that question takes us beyond labor market numbers. It takes us to care responsibilities, social norms, transport, workplace conditions, institutional incentives, and the quality of reforms. It also takes us to the heart of development itself, because when women's economic potential is constrained, the whole economy operates below its possibilities. Families lose income, firms lose talent, communities lose dynamism, and the country loses part of its growth engine. For this reason, today's dialogue is designed as an open, evidence-based conversation. We'll use interactive polling to capture views in real time and sharpen the discussion around two central questions. Number one, what is the primary constraint preventing more women from working in Egypt? And two, are current reforms sufficient to address it? These questions, dear friends, are not abstract. They are practical, urgent, and policy relevant. They invite us to move beyond slogans and easy answers. They ask us to confront complexity, to listen carefully, and to think honestly about what works, what does not, and what still needs to be done. I am particularly pleased that this dialogue places students at the center of the discussion. Through a demanding essay competition, I understand it, we have seen not only the quality of their analysis, but also the energy, courage, and seriousness with which young people are engaging the future of Egypt's labor market. They remind us that students are not waiting on the margins of the economy. They are already helping to shape the conversation, asking sharper questions, challenging inherited assumptions, and bringing fresh imagination to one of Egypt's most important development challenges. We are delighted to welcome the 4 winning student speakers, Zaina Alam, Adam El-Biblawi, Ala Sliti, and Hassan Amir. They will present distinct and well-researched perspectives on our theme. One team will argue that current reforms are broadly effective but require complementary measures. The other will argue that current reforms are insufficient or even counterproductive and must be fundamentally rethought. This is exactly the kind of debate we need: serious, evidence-based, and open to disagreements. Progress, dear friends, does not come from avoiding difficult questions. It comes from creating the space where those questions can be asked with rigor, respect, and ambition. Youth voices matter because young people are not only the future beneficiaries of today's decisions. They are future employers, they are the future workers, researchers, entrepreneurs, and they are certainly the future policymakers. They will live with the consequences of the choices being made today, but they will also be the ones to improve, challenge, and renew those choices tomorrow. That is why their participation is so important. They bring not only knowledge, but also urgency. They remind all of us that development is not only about indicators and reforms. It's about opportunity. It's about dignity. It's about whether every person, woman or man, can contribute fully to the economy and society. I look forward to a thoughtful and engaging session. I'm confident that the insights generated today will contribute meaningfully to Egypt's development conversation. I must, at the end, thank you for making ERF a part of this great effort. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Raed. I'd like now to invite Mr. Stefan for his opening remarks.
Good morning. Great to see you all here. And thank you for the introduction. I'll be very brief. Dina, I'm not doing the presentation now, right? We'll sit after. I'll come back for the presentation. So just to say how delighted I'm here for 3 reasons. First, it's really a celebration of partnerships. As Samir, you said, I'm almost living on the AUC campus now. We were here with our president in this very room a month ago, and we have a very extensive partnership. So thank you for hosting this event and working together. And thank you to ERF, you, Dr. Shirin, and very nice meeting you, Raed, as well. Delighted to continue. We have had a series of those conversations, and I think they are really very meaningful and productive. So delighted to continue these partnerships. Second reason to be delighted to be here is the topic of today. I'll come back in my presentation on our focus in the World Bank Group on jobs. So this is the central message that our president delivered when he was here 2 months ago. But when you look at the jobs agenda in Egypt, as Dr. Raed just said, it's a lot about the participation of women in the labor market. So I can't think, like the way you presented to your student, Sameh, I can't think of a more important, consequential challenge to debate today than how to bring more women on the labor market. And third reason to be delighted is, indeed, as others have said, is the format of this conversation. I'm from the World Bank, so I cannot resist having a couple of slides. I will make a presentation with a few slides. But this is all about the debates, getting your ideas, evidence-based, as was said before, and really challenging each other to be creative, bringing new ideas. I think this is what the labor markets ask you to develop for your own future, but this is also what really challenging development issue like the role of women on the labor market requires from us. So I'm very excited to be here with partners, discuss one of the most important topic for the country, and do it in a very interactive and challenging format. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefan. We're now going to shift into the heart of the event. I'd like to ask the following people to take their seats on the stage. Mr. Stefan, please, who will start by setting the scene for our topic today. Professor Nagla Rizk will be our expert discussant today. And our four student debaters, Zaina Alem, Adam Biblawi, Ala Slaiti, and Hassan Aimer. Thank you very much. I would like to start first by handing the floor to Mr. Stefan for his keynote presentation. His remarks will set the macroeconomic and policy context for the debate that follows. Mr. Stefan.
Thank you very much. So the focus, I'll start essentially with where our president, who was here a couple of weeks ago, left it, which is the challenge of jobs. It's a challenge that the entire world is facing, and the number are startling. If you look at the number of young people like yourself who will enter the labor market in the next decade, you can count around 1.2 billion new entrants on the labor market. But if you look at the trends of the number of jobs that are being created, and this is not the entire world, this is emerging and developing market economies. If you look at the trends of job created, it's around 400 million jobs. Now, not all people in age of working would be looking for a job. Many will be and should be in training or in university. But even if you add that, it leaves at least 300 million people looking for a job that the labor market is not able to provide under current trends. This is a major challenge for those individuals. A job is a source of income, a source of dignity, a source of meaning. It's also a serious issue for those countries in terms of stability. The challenge is across all regions, and you can see at the bottom how it's decomposed across regions. Obviously, the demographics are very different in Africa and in Europe, for instance. But you see in the Middle East and North Africa region where Egypt belongs, and Egypt is actually one of the countries with, in the top 10-ish of the countries with most people entering the labor market over the next decade or so. So this is just to plant the scene of the job challenge globally. Within that, here's the situation in Egypt. First, looking backwards, looking at the past, I think 2 decades, how the structure of the labor market has evolved. And here the key message from that chart is essentially that the sectors that have been growing, so the sector that are on the right side of the chart, are also the sector that have been negatively contributing to productivity growth. So those that are at the bottom of the chart, which is in development, you've had those classes. This is the opposite of what you would like to see. You would like to see a structural transformation where more and more employment is shifting to sectors that are more and more productive. This is how a country develops. So that's one of the fundamental challenge the country is facing in terms of having its structural transformation in some sense that's going the wrong way. It's moving away from the most productive sectors and moving into less productive sectors. Now looking forward, if you look at the need for Egypt in terms of job creation, the demographics is about 1.5, 1.6 million entrants to the labor market per year. And over the past 2 decades, it's only about 600,000 jobs that were created every year. And that's to do with the level of growth in the economy, which was around 4.3% in the past 2 decades. 4.3% is the aggregate. Now, if you do it on a per capita basis, it's much lower, more like 2. And that's low compared to other middle-income countries. And a major driver for that is the very low private investment in the economy. So 6%, the number you see here, is the ratio of private investment to GDP, which in most countries is certainly in the double digits and usually above 20%. So as a result, you've seen a decline in the employment to population ratio. And you can see here this ratio around in the 40s, which is well below what most other middle-income countries see. And of course, a big reason for that is the role of women in the labor force participation. So this chart now tries to unpack the role of women in the labor market by sectors, something you probably all know. This is based on data from the 2023 labor market survey. A lot of the current employments are in agriculture, very often unpaid family work. We've seen, interestingly, a strong increase in construction and transport. However, these are sectors that remain vastly dominated by men. And then in the private sector, a lot of the women jobs are in retail jobs, various shops, often very informal jobs with very little contractual protections. So as a result, here is the trend on women, female labor force participation. It's never been strong, never been high historically in Egypt, but we've also seen a decline from the peak of 2006 to the various surveys down to around 18% in the last survey. Now, there are some initial results from last year's survey that suggest it might have turned around a little bit, maybe to 20%. But 20% remains extremely low. Of course, you see that this low level is disproportionately on the poorer families. So the chart at the bottom gives you the likelihood of participation in the labor market across the distribution of income. So to the left are the lowest quintile of consumption, to the right the higher quintile. So being in richer, better off families give you a higher chance to work. So education does make a difference, but is not the single answer to female labor force participation. We also, from data, can see that marriage and unpaid care often drive inactivity. One silver lining from the recent data is an extremely rapid growth of businesses that are owned by women. So this is the growth between the last two surveys, so between 2017-18 and 22-23. And you see the two bars to the left, the growth for women-owned is close to 50% against 10% only for male-owned businesses. So that's one sign of dynamism that is positive. But on many of the other indicators, in particular when it comes to comparing wages, there's a very significant disparity against women. So we'll spend some time debating what are the core barriers for women to enter more systematically the labor market. We've tried on this slide, but this is really offering for debate to structure them around those 5 types of barriers. One related to social norms, but also practical aspect of caring for family, both children and elderly. The other is the risk of being mainly attracted in the informal sector, which, by the way, is another question that can be debated, the extent to which the data that we're looking at properly capture the informal sector. A barrier that is very frequently raised as a #1 barrier is the ability to use safely transport and to either to have jobs that are close to home or to be able to safely move around the city to access jobs. A 4th category of barrier is maybe less about the overall education. I mentioned earlier that this is an important aspect, but it's not the only one, but maybe more around the skills job mismatch and maybe more around what Samir was mentioning earlier of the type of skills that women have to enter the market. And then most likely, and again worth discussing, some biases on the employer side. Biases against hiring women, in particular in the formal sector. Now, there's been a number of important reforms that have been adopted in the past couple of years. Some of them you might have seen. We've launched, I think, a month ago, a global report called Women, Business and the Law, where we noted a number of these improvements, even though Egypt remains at an average level compared to other countries, but at least there was significant progress, in particular through the labor law that was approved last year, that is promoting equal pay, remove some restrictions on work for women, increase the flexibility or the opportunities for flexible work, increase the length of maternity leave. So a number of these reforms are positive and are not systematically addressing all of the barriers that I mentioned on the previous slide, but are making a dent on some of them. And before moving to some of the solutions, the last point I wanted to make, which goes back to Samir's point about how material this topic is. So many of you, I'm sure, have done development classes, or at ERF, you've done research trying to simulate the impact of this or that reform. When you do those simulations or this modeling, if you find a reform that has a 5% impact on GDP, that's a very important reform to prioritize. Here we're talking about 40–50% impact on GDP. Now, arguably, this is none of that happens with a stroke of a pen reform, but this topic is as big as it gets in terms of making a difference not only on the women that we're talking about entering the labor market, but on the overall economy, on the overall level of development of the country. So this is, there are many reasons to focus on this topic, but one of them is that it's really good economics. I wanted to also add a little bit, elaborate a little bit on this point that this is not just the level of education. In fact, when you look at university graduates, you also see not a very high participation to the labor market, but it's also the nature of the skills and the matching of the skills with what employers are looking for. And then last slide to move to the conversations on what it will take. So from all these barriers, the way we've been looking at it in Egypt, but benefiting from what work we do in other countries, is to think about those three building blocks. One on the legal and regulatory side. So these are some of the reforms that I mentioned earlier that are captured by the Women, Business and the Law report. But there are a number of inequities that remain in the law, either formally in the law or in the way the law is implemented in practice. Second big buckets are all issues related to skills, both to offer the right skills from the education system and the training system, but also to support women throughout their career. And including through entrepreneurship that I mentioned earlier is a potential major silver lining for the role of women in the economy. And third is to really think of this agenda as something integrated. You cannot just fix one small things here or there. You have to look at an integrated approach. It's not just transport if you don't have childcare. It's not just training if you don't have employers having less of a bias. These things need to be looked at together. And fundamentally, just like for the rest of the economy, it will have to happen through a much more active role of the private sector, hiring women, and therefore having these kind of conversations also with the private sector, thinking with them about potential biases and structural barriers that women are facing in their firms is really important. So let me stop there. I hope it gives you, I think some of the numbers were probably obvious to you, but at least it puts them all together in one place for you. I hope it gives you, if it wasn't obvious, the magnitude of the challenge and the opportunity that we are looking at here. And I hope it also gives you a bit of a framework to think what are the big building blocks that policymakers need to think through to make a difference on this topic, because this is really a topic, as we've now all said and repeated, this is a topic that is immensely material for individuals, but also for the country and the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stefan. Actually, what you have provided us with now is the basics of what the students are actually going to build on and explore. But before the student teams make their arguments, I want to ask you all, everyone sitting in the room, students, faculty, guests, whoever you are sitting in the audience side, to please scan the QR code. You will be taken through a short polling in the form of 3 questions. I want you to answer them very honestly, based on what you know and what you believe right now. It's now working, right? Yeah? Yes. Okay. Now you have a first question. Question 1 is saying, before today, how familiar were you with Egypt's female labor force participation data? The data is still not stable, so people are still voting. So we'll wait before we move to question 2. So we have almost 50% are somewhat familiar. They have a general picture. 30% very familiar, following this topic closely. So these are probably the labor economists and gender economists in the room. And we have 22% who are saying not very familiar. They knew it was low, but not the details of it. So I'm really hoping that attending this session today is raising more awareness about the topic among many of you. So we can now move to question 2. Question 2 is saying, what is the main constraint preventing more women from working in Egypt today? And again, this is from what you know, from what you've heard already in the first part of the session. Yeah. All the questions are appearing. Okay, so for question 2, we're seeing the majority of people saying care, responsibilities, and social norms. 32% are saying workplace conditions, informality, safety, and discrimination. 9% lack of suitable job opportunities, and 6% skills mismatch and education gaps. Building on those 2 questions, we'll take you to the third question, which I think you've already seen on your screens. Are current reforms enough to significantly increase women's participation in the labor market? And the majority, 58%, are saying no, and deeper structural changes are needed. The remaining votes are split between partially, but key gaps remain. Others are saying yes, but implementation is the main challenge. And we have 4% who are not sure, so I'm really hoping in the second round of polling, the unsure people are actually able to form an opinion on this. So thank you, and we'll come back to these answers later as we build after the students get to their presentations. So let's now introduce our students. Out of the essays submitted to this competition, 4 were selected for today. And the 4 students have been organized into 2 teams, each defending a clear position in the debate. Team 1, we have Zeina Allam and Adam Biblawi, who will argue that Egypt's current economic reforms are a necessary foundation, but insufficient on their own. Team 2, we have Ala Saliti and Hassan Aimer, who will argue something sharper, that the current reforms are not just insufficient, but they're structurally harmful to women's employment. Each team has 15 minutes, so please listen very carefully. And remember, you will be voting again at the end. So let me start with inviting our first team to present their position. Zeina and Adam, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, I'm Zeina Allam.
And I'm Adam Biblawi.
And today we're going to be presenting our stance on why we believe current macroeconomic reforms are necessary to close the gender gap, but they're insufficient. Current macroeconomic reforms show that the foundation exists, but is incomplete. Egypt has legal frameworks, national strategies, and multilateral partnerships in place. What it lacks is a second layer of reforms that target specific distortions in the labor market that the first generation of reforms failed to tackle completely. What's missing? The gender gap in Egypt is not a story of women lacking capability. It's a story of a labor market that fails to convert women's qualifications into employment through glass ceilings, sticky floors, and the unpaid care burden. The answer is not to start over, it's to redesign from within. The numbers show that the crisis is undeniable. The female labor force participation rate in Egypt is 18%, which has been constantly declining over the past decade, as opposed to the global average of 49%. The female youth unemployment rate is 47.1%, and 34.5% of women in employment are in vulnerable positions, informal, unprotected, and with no social safety nets beneath them. Meanwhile, the economic cost of inaction is staggering. By closing the gender gap, Egypt can raise its GDP by 56%. And this is not a social statistic. This is a macroeconomic emergency, and yet the current policies do not treat it as such. Finally, Egypt's global gender gap index score has improved by 10.7% in the past from 2017, and if we compare that to the regional average, we see that it has improved by 73.5%, and this shows that Egypt is not just falling short, it's falling behind its own neighbors. Here lies the paradox at the heart of this debate. Women's literacy rates have grown from 34.1% to 73.3% from 1990 to 2022. This is among the fastest growing rates in the world. In terms of employment, we see that the females are more qualified than their male counterparts, and yet participation still remains flat. Here lies the MENA paradox. Rising education is not translated into rising employment. And critically, if women had the identical skill set or qualifications as men, the wage gap would be even wider, and this is because the discrimination is currently being masked by women overqualifying just to compete. Therefore, we see this is not a labor supply side issue. Women are ready, however, the market is what's distorted. Women are structurally cornered in both the public and the private sector. In the public sector, we see them seeking security, maternal benefits, and job stability or a more stable pay. However, they encounter glass ceilings where they comprise only 28% of top management positions. And this is further reinforced by the idea that advancement belongs to the male breadwinner and that he is the priority. In the private sector, we see the opposite, sticky floors. While wages are higher in theory, the protection policies are minimal, the discrimination is widespread, and the wage gap is at its widest, except for the top 5% of roles. Rationally, women trade higher pay for more stability, and this is not a free choice. It's caused by a structural trap that is engendered through absent social policies and monitoring mechanisms, and therefore we see that replacing the current architecture altogether is not the solution. It's closing the enforcement and monitoring gap that's going to do so. The main economic argument lies in human capital misallocation. Egypt does not suffer from a shortage of qualified women. It is underutilizing the human capital of 50% of its population, and the mechanism for that is the care burden. During peak working years, women spend 34 hours weekly on average on unpaid domestic work, while men spend only 4 hours, and this is characterized as the second shift, and it disrupts numerous women's careers. If we look at it from the labor supply terms, we see that the opportunity cost of paid employment rises tremendously, and when the opportunity cost is this high, the reservation wage, which is the minimum wage for rational market entry, rises massively, which prices women completely out of the market. And this creates a self-reinforcing cycle of exclusion that no awareness campaign and no legal framework has yet mentioned. And this is where we believe intervention is possible and where the second layer agenda must tackle.
All right, now let's head into our benchmarks. We'll be seeing how Tunisia and Mexico both implement different policies to resolve and enhance their female labor force participation. Each benchmark is used for a different purpose. Tunisia's main role here is to draw a very synonymous socio-cultural background and economy that is also leading in the context of its female labor force participation. What are the issues that this economy faces and how they've resolved them. Mexico, on the other hand, is what the far future can look like for Egypt, how effective policies, strong institutions, and coordinated efforts can actually resolve this, the female labor force participation gap to a great extent. Now, heading into Tunisia, it shows how, even though it exists in a similar context, Egypt can still improve very significantly with its current constraints. Tunisia currently exhibits a 26.5% female labor force participation compared to Egypt's 15.1%. Now, in an Arab Barometer report in 2025, it reported that the two main barriers for entry for women into the workforce were childcare and low wages. When it comes to childcare, in the context of availability, accessibility, and affordability. If a woman is not comfortable enough in leaving her woman in a childcare institution, if a woman cannot afford to leave her child in a childcare institution, then it is very unlikely that she will choose to work. And the accessibility of it, the affordability of it for women is an incredible constraint, especially for women in the MENA region, as this survey that has been conducted in other countries within the Arab region also yield similar results. Now, a program that was also conducted by within Tunisia is the CIVP wage program. A quick summary of it is that it was a subsidy program that subsidized employers that actually hired women. It worked as an incentive structure. However, there was a clear deficiency within it. The subsidy was released to employers upon their hiring of these of women, not upon a contract of a certain length, or not upon them remaining within the company for, say, a year. It was released immediately upon employment. So what employers would do is that they would hire a woman and then receive the subsidy and then fire the woman. So this clearly indicated that incentives alone and subsidization alone was not enough. The program, however, still, despite this, did record in the long run positive impacts for highly educated women. However, in the short run, there was zero or possibly even negative implications. So, from Tunisia, we can learn a very important takeaway in the context of Egypt, that better outcomes will require enhanced care support, better job quality, and incredible social protection coordinated with institutional players. Now, moving on to Mexico. Mexico is, again, what Egypt can be one day. It currently hosts a female labor force participation of 50%, more than 3 times that of Egypt. Other than that, Mexico also displays 75% of its employers reporting skill shortages, a statistic that's nearly synonymous with that of Egypt's. The OECD had reported on Mexico that the main things that assisted it in reaching this female labor force participation were childcare, full-day schools and the clear schedules of the school days, elder care, and education in labor market alignment. These factors are all what permit and allow women to feel comfortable in entering the labor force, comfortable with leaving their child in childcare institutions, and to be able to take public transportation and exist in the workplace without feeling harassment. All things that exist within Mexico that do not exist within the Egyptian labor economy. 2 programs especially were conducted that were incredibly useful in the context to be applied in Egypt. Santas Infidales, which was a childcare subsidization policy, which was later deemed to be insufficient and incapable of actually providing real impact. The reason we mention this is to show one clear conclusion. Subsidies and just throwing money at the issue is not the solution. What we need is long-term solutions, and we'll be getting into our policy recommendations later. A second policy that was introduced was a digitization platform that primarily targeted transportation workers, whether they be for delivery or buses, and it had within the first year over 1 billion signups. The method here was a monitoring mechanism, so that the government had a channel directly with employees to report employers if they are violating their rights, be that of women or be that of men. Regardless, in Egypt, we have a monitoring and effective execution score from the Women Law and Business 2026 report that is nearly in the worst countries in the world. So our job is not legislation, it is actually improving execution and monitoring. Mexico, in this context, fundamentally shows how care systems and educations are treated as a core element of the labor market infrastructure so that they can be effective. Now, there are 2 incredible programs within Egypt that currently target women to a very large extent, those being Takaful and Karama and Forsa. These programs, while they are not women-specific, thankfully, have most of their beneficiaries being women. Takaful and Karama reaches 4.67 million households, with 70% of the beneficiaries of these programs being women. That's about 13 million people in the Egyptian economy. Forsa, a smaller yet more dedicated program to employment, has about 26,000 beneficiaries with 76.5% of women. These are not solutions to the gender gap on their own, but they are channels. They are channels to pilot, to learn, to understand what could work in the Egyptian economy. Because right now, we don't have that answer. And this is why we need the second generation of reforms. We should scale Forsa through Takaful and Karama to provide and test different methodologies within childcare, job matching skills, and micro-enterprise support, so that we may learn and understand how best we can actually close this gender gap in the labor market. Now, heading on into our policy recommendations, how do we fundamentally get the female labor force from to feel protected and into employment? The first thing that we need is targeted care. As we mentioned with our benchmarks, throwing money at the issue isn't the solution here. The main thing that needs to be conducted and needs to be done is that you need to establish trust and effective child care support to where the family, as there is social stigmas within the Egyptian economy and other Arab regions of leaving your child in the hand of another caretaker. To resolve these issues fundamentally, to establish these connections of trust and the capacity and the quality capacity for these institutions to actually ingest these children in a comfortable environment where parents are capable of leaving them, is essential to actually provide the care support needed for women to find employment. We should scale Forsa. We should scale Forsa to the extent where it resolves the skill mismatch issue. It resolves the capability of women, providing them with assets, skills, and jobs, as well as micro-enterprise support. As we have seen, entrepreneurship in women has grown in recent years. This is an incredible thing that we need to conduct to ensure that not just women are feeling that they are capable of self-employment, but employing other women as well. Finally, firm incentives. Firm incentives are the probably only thing within the within Egypt right now that's counterproductive to some extent. Firm incentives are, to a very large degree, punishing the employer for hiring a woman rather than rewarding them in such a context. This is why we need to reverse the structure of firm incentives. Keep the legality as is, but instead of a punishment mechanism, we should establish a reward mechanism.
Other themes that we believe are relevant for upcoming reforms to entail are gender-sensitive educational reforms, and this would comprise of curricula that redefines gender roles from the earlier stages, that would be evenly distributed between girls and boys, and that would aim to create the cultural shift that short-term current initiatives fail to manufacture. Secondly, would be stronger enforcement mechanisms. So the Equal Pay Act actually is binding on the Egypt's CEDAW commitment. However, low enforcement and absent monitoring policies keep firms de-incentivized to comply, and even lacking what actionable guiding steps for compliance would even look like.
Now, to wrap up this presentation and our final takeaways is that Egypt's gender gap is a fundamentally structural issue. It is not due to any form of lack of education or ability or capacity by women to actually enter the workforce. Women are the human capital of this economy. And this human capital is not being translated into effective work, and it's creating a very large gap within the capability of Egypt to develop.
We believe that current reforms are the floor and not the ceiling. Therefore, Egypt should not replace the reforms in place. It should deepen them through a second generation that corrects failure incentives for firms, households, and institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zeina and Adam. Precisely argued. So let's move to the second theme, Ala and Hassan. As they were hearing the first team do their presentations, I saw them nodding a bit. So are there any lines of agreements?
Maybe a bit of overlap.
So please start your presentation.
Just going to test this. Okay. Is it all right? Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Hassan Amir, and this is my partner. And we're going to be presenting on why Egypt's reforms are not just insufficient, but they're structurally gender aggressive concerning labor market participation.
Hassan, I'm sorry, I'll interrupt you for a second. Do you have a second mic?
Yes.
Yes, because this is one of the ways, again, gender balance. So I need to make sure she has a mic. Thank you.
Okay, so just to start, I want everyone in the room to look at these two grids. And so every square here you see represents one country. 148 countries ranked by gender gap. So the green square at the top left, that's Egypt. First in the world for educational gender parity. Now if we look at the second grid, find the red square, also Egypt, 145th out of 148 in ranking for gender gap in the labor market. So only 3 countries rank lower in the world. It's the same country, same women, opposite ends of the ranking. So this brings us to a paradox. So it's not a data error. Egypt has invested decades and billions in educating women. It worked. Women now match or even outperform men at every level of education. And yet only 18% of Egyptian women participate in the labor force. The gap between those two facts is what we're here trying to explain. Our argument is quite simple. Egypt has been solving the wrong problem. And so on to our thesis. So Egypt's reforms, equal pay legislation, the national women's strategy, awareness campaigns are all supply-side interventions applied to a demand-side crisis. They assume that equipping women is enough, but the problem is not on the supply side.
And it goes way further than that. These reforms are not just insufficient, they are structurally gender regressive. While the government passes the equal pay law with one hand, it is also eliminating women's jobs with the other. While privatizing the public sector with zero gender impact assessment, Egypt is not just failing to solve the right problem, it is actively making the wrong one worse.
So we'll show you 3 things: why the growth model excludes women by design, why the barriers women face go far deeper than any workplace law, and why inflation has made formal work economically irrational for women, regardless of what is legislated.
First of all, we're gonna head into our first part, which is the structural disconnect. So basically, the vanishing power. The one sector that did employ women, which is the public sector, is actively shrinking. Privatization has pushed the private sector share of employment from 67% to 82%. But women account only for 14% of the private sector workers. In 2024 alone, female public employees fell by 8.5%, faster than the overall rate of 6.5%. This is not just a neutral reform, it is a gendered one, and the numbers make that impossible to ignore. The same reform package that promises women equal pay is eliminating the jobs they actually hold. This chart makes the structural mismatch more visible. Look at the sector on Egypt's growth agenda. Construction, transportation, hydrocarbons, these are where women work. Construction actually employs 17.5% of their employees as men and only 0.8% as women. Now look at where women actually work: in health, social work, agriculture, education. These are the sectors that Egypt's IMF package is actually holding under fiscal pressure, which meaning cutting budgets, freezing public hiring, and pushing privatization. The economy here is not just ignoring women, it is shrinking the parts of it they can depend on. That is the structural disconnect at the heart of our argument, and no supply-side law is actually touching it.
So let's take a look at the education paradox. And this is actually the sharpest proof that this is a demand-side failure. So university-educated women face the highest unemployment of any group, 26.5%. It's a bit concerning for everyone here. But the steepest decline of female labor force participation occurred among women, with university degrees down 7.6 percentage points in a decade. And why? So because educated women were waiting for public sector jobs, right? And those are positions that offered security, predictable hours, maternity leave. And those positions are vanishing now with all the ongoing privatization. And rather than accept informal conditions with no protections, they withdrew entirely. So the more educated a woman is in Egypt, the worse her labor market outcomes.
And this brings us to our second part, which is the binding constraint, in which we're gonna take you through the 5 gates from education to employment that an Egyptian woman is going through. First, even if we fix the economy, a woman trying to enter the Egyptian labor market faces 5 gates, and current reform only addresses the last one, which is the workplace. Basically, as a woman, I graduate, but 40% of employed women actually exit the workforce after their first child within 2 years. Of those who might survive that gate, they hit the care wall. Only 10% of children under 4 have access to childcare. And women can carry, as mentioned in the slides before, 5.4 times more unpaid care than men. Then comes the compute. 80% of only Cairo women feels unsafe taking the public transportation. This without including women in Upper Egypt and any other region in this country. And if she doesn't make it through all of these gates, they reach a workplace where 51% of firms actually openly prefer to hire men. The labor law number 14 fixes the last door, which is the workplace, in a corridor with 4 other doors that are locked. And fixing only the final stage achieves nothing if women cannot survive the marriage gate, the care wall, and the commute barrier.
So let's take a look at the economic proof. So since 2016, Egypt has experienced 359% cumulative inflation. And I'm sure we've all felt that effect, but here's the sequence of events that happens. So real wages fall, and the cost of childcare rises relative to their wages. So formal work no longer covers childcare costs, right? And then the opportunity cost of entering the formal employment sector soars, and so informal work becomes economically rational. So women aren't choosing to stay home, the maths is choosing for them. And the World Bank ran a randomized control trial in urban Egypt. They tested 3 interventions, each designed to remove a supply-side barrier to women's formal employment. Childcare subsidies, job matching services, and then both of them combined simultaneously. The result was none of them meaningfully increased formal employment. So they removed every supply-side barrier at once, but women still didn't enter formal work. So this study is the definitive test. If supply-side reform worked, it would have worked there. The demand side is broken, and that is precisely what the current reforms don't touch.
And this is why we thought about rethinking the approach of the economic reforms. Basically, some might argue that the reforms are decent but just need a little bit of improvement, but let's be precise about why that fails. First, empirically. The female labor force participation fell from 27 to 18% while these reforms were running. These reforms have had time. The trend is not improving. It is accelerating actually in the wrong direction. Second, analytically, the labor law number 14 mandates equal pay in a market where 51% of firms openly shared that they would prefer to hire men in the first place. You cannot negotiate the terms of a door that is structurally closed. And third, and most critically, the reform package is not neutral, it is regressive. Privatization is eliminating the jobs women hold with no gender impact assessment on any of it. Egypt is not just failing to open new doors for women, it is actively closing the doors they already walked through. And for this, we had our comparative evidence. The argument that this is maybe too hard and Egypt's culture and fiscal constraints make genuine reform impossible is refuted by the region's own evidence. Turkey actually raised the female participation 11 points through employer-mandated childcare. Tunisia gained 3.3 points during the IMF-era austerity. And Jordan brought factories to rural women and filled 90% of those jobs with women. And Egypt even owned precedent. The FGM prevalence actually among girls fell from 21 to 14% in under a decade, which means that culture actually changed because policy changed. The argument that it cannot happen is not a constraint. Egypt has already proven it wrong. Every reform in Egypt has been introduced since 2016 assumes the same thing, that women are not working because they lack skills, access, or awareness. We've shown you the evidence that this is wrong. Educated women are being turned away. The World Bank ran the experiment and zero employment impact. What does actually work in this case? Basically, we need to change the price of discrimination. Our first policy, which is a policy that we agree on for the first team, that we need actually to have incentive, a corporate tax reduction tied to female payroll share. Basically, firms where women represent 30% or more might have a corporate tax instead of 22.5 being 20, at 40% it drops to 18, etc. There's no new institution in this, no new budget line. The tax authority and the social insurance systems are already digitally linked under law number 148, and this makes hiring women actually cheaper than excluding them for the first time by law. Our second policy, which is the mandatory paid paternity leave through social insurance. Egypt now gives 1 day of paternity leave. Meanwhile, Morocco leads the MENA region of 15 days. The World Bank own RCT showed subsidized childcare failed because social norms made it costly for mothers to use. Paternity leave doesn't ask family to just change their norms, it legally redistributes care and costs the state nothing. Neither policy of our policies actually require new spending. Both require a political and economical will to impose a cost on discrimination rather than politely requesting firms to stop.
Okay, so just to wrap this up, so out of every 100 Egyptian women who graduate from university today, fewer than 18 will be in the workforce a decade later. Some will say the reforms are decent but need improvement, but the journey map tells us a different story, that women are being pushed out from the moment they become mothers, and those who stay hit a care system that was never built for them and streets that were never made safe for them. And those who make it through all of that, who survive every gate, arrive at the labor market where formal pay is pays less than it costs to show up. So that is the inflation trap. It's not a mindset, it's not a skills gap, an economic calculation that reform packages haven't really touched. And under the current architecture, can't. So Egypt has not neglected its women, it's failed them precisely because it kept solving the wrong problem. And every year it does, 82 more women quietly exit and never come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ala and Hassan. Before we hear from our expert discussant, I want to make sure this room hears something that is very important. The two debate teams represent 4 essays, but among other students who submitted work to this competition, some are in this room today. Students who not only wrote strong essays, but who are greatly acknowledged for their intellectual effort and sustained engagement. So I would like to give the floor to the first team, the team who, like Zaina and Adam, believe that the reforms were good but need to be enhanced, updated, or complemented. So we have Malak, Aidel, Jana, and Laila. Each of them is going to share one key insight from their papers with the floor. So if we can pass on the mic for them, please.
Okay, I really enjoyed the discussion. I just wanted to add that I agree it's a demand side problem rather than a supply side. While the existing reforms are working, we can go a further step to work on the incentives for the private sector. Right now, the public sector is the main employer for women, and the question of whether the private sector will be able to absorb this amount of women is questionable. I think the private sector's main concern is maximizing the returns and minimizing their costs. So acting on social equality on its own is not going to be something we can guarantee. I'd just like to add that rather than just sticking to incentivizing the private sector as a whole concept, we can use the breakdown of sectors where women employment is more like the education or healthcare sector, and actually work on subsidizing these for reducing the cost of hiring women rather than just looking at the private sector as a whole concept. So this is just an insight I wanted to add. I also think that the public sector's reduction is happening faster than the ability of the private sector to absorb these women. So I think the slowdown of this or the efficient employment of women would be helpful in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Laila. Jana, please.
I also agree, and I want to say that the participation, I believe, really depends on whether the market wage exceeds the reservation wage. And in Egypt, this threshold is really shaped by the three main structural constraints, the unpaid childcare, and I think that expanding the childcare infrastructure and portraying it that it's not a luxury really will help reserve that constraint. And the social norms, I think that incentives and employment structures will need to adapt accordingly. And finally, the job quality, if it's low, the returns to the work are limited, and therefore making improvements in job quality and flexibility is crucial. So the question is not whether the women can participate, it's whether the economy will be designed to allow them to. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana. Aidel, please.
So I agree with this also, but the problem is it's not just a gender issue, but a clear inefficiency in how Egypt uses its human capital. This gap persists because problem in the structure and not simply lack of overall jobs in the market. It's also beyond economics because factors such as unsafe transportation, harassment in the workplaces, and restrictive social norms limit the women participation. Finally, I believe for Egypt to close this gap requires more than just economic growth. It requires targeted reform and efficient implementation that addresses both economic and social reform. This can be Egypt's opportunity for a more sustainable economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Aidel. Malak, please.
I agree with everything said by my colleagues, and I'd just like to add that I think a major issue is that the current economic reforms are overlooking the childcare constraint. So we're currently in a situation where nurseries are only serving 1% of working mothers, and 87% of families are also completely rejecting external childcare because of social norms and stigma around women leaving their children at home and being labeled as bad. So this is leading a lot of women, I think this was mentioned by this team, that a lot of women are exiting the labor force by age 30. So my strongest recommendation to combat this would be mandating on-site childcare infrastructure for large companies, as well as integrating norm-shifting campaigns into this to make sure that once we provide these resources for families, that it doesn't go to waste and that families actually use it, and so that we can increase potential GDP per capita by about 15 to 20% by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malak. So I'll now equally give the floor to the other team who, like Ala and Hassan, believe that the current reforms need to be replaced altogether. So Salma, Muhammad, and Mayar, please.
Hassan mentioned. I also wanted to add something I read from another ERF associate, Rogi Asad. He mentioned the U-shaped labor supply curve that was created by Claudian Golden, and he called it the broken U. So basically, this is a U labor supply. It's pretty much shaped like a U. And it pretty much says that it kind of gives like a contradiction of public employment. And obviously that there isn't that much the private sector can't really compensate with the shrinking of the public sector jobs. So it's kind of reform has been done enough to trigger that recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Muhammad. Salma, please.
So I fully agree with Hassan and Ala, and because like women's employment in Egypt is conditional and it's not stable. It depends on many things like marriage, household dynamics, and whether work fits social expectations. So ELMPS data from my research showed that 1.12 million women stopped working altogether when they got married, and the two most reasons for that were husband opposition, forming 400,000, and care responsibilities, making the employment decisions shaped on the household level rather than the individual level. So reforms are targeting the individual level and also private sector incentives, which are not going to solve the problem, because like this places the burden on women once more to be able to manage their care responsibilities as well as their work, which is very costly and leaves them out of the equation altogether. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Salma. Mayar, please.
I first want to thank my peers for their talk. It's very insightful. And I just want to mention some structural issues that are deeply rooted in our society. And first is that women are pushed into fields like education and humanities. They are low-wage jobs later on. So when they graduate, they find themselves without a job that can secure like them financially. And then it's not actually by their choice. It's the dynamic of the culture that forced them actually to get into these majors. And then we have the government jobs that used to absorb these women. It totally like disappeared, and the private sector didn't like step up. So we have a very wide gap, a surplus in women because of the government jobs not being available. And of course, we have the employer bias with 85% networking informality, and it's actually very men-dominated. The networking environment is very men-dominated, so there's actually no place for women to actually be in the work field or to actually start working. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the other student teams as well who shared their insights and their arguments, and I'm sure everyone who's sitting back there can now understand how difficult the process of selection was. So I'd like to thank the committee for that at this point. But I now come to the part of the event that I think will make everything you've just heard land differently. Professor Nagla Riz is a professor of economics and founding director of the Access to Knowledge for Development Center at AUC, and his research sits precisely at the intersection of development, economics, equity, and digital transformation. And she's going to bring to this debate the kind of scholarly depth and regional perspective that it genuinely needs. So Dr. Nagla is not going to declare a winner. She's going to do something that is more valuable, to take the arguments you have just shared from all the speakers and to enrich them. And I'm confident that what she's about to say will add a dimension to this conversation. Dr. Nagla, please.
Thank you very much, Dina, and thank you all. First, thank you for including me in this amazing event. I'm sitting here very proud of you all. So congratulations to all of you. There's no winner, you're all winners. And we sit to learn. So thank you all very much. I understand I have 10 minutes. I'm going to try and make the best use of that. I thought about this. It was difficult for me to give an intervention. I'm not siding with any team, but I thought of sharing with you some of our research results. We work at the Access to Knowledge for Development Center and its flagship initiative, the MENA Observatory on Responsible AI. So I thought of two specific areas where one specific project when we worked with women on the ground, and I'll speak more about that, and the other track on feminist AI, and I'm going to give you some insights that relate to what, with no specific preference to any team. So if you allow me to do that, these are my 2 points, and then I'll have a concluding note in the end. So first, we work with, and this emerged from our research post-COVID. Our work, we do evidence-based research. We get the evidence and we work with multi-stakeholders and go to policymakers, and we have success stories, alhamdulillah, in that areas. So one of the projects was with women, informal digital entrepreneurs, women who sell on WhatsApp, Facebook, etc., informally, and especially this surged after COVID-19. So the project is happening until today. We have a series of phases. The first, and this emerged, by the way, in our series of webinars to find out the impact of COVID on the future of work and the labor market in Egypt. We work in the region and globally. And basically, this is a type of work that has really came up. And I remember Dr. Ragi Asad, during one of the webinars, he texted me. He said, is anyone doing research on this? And I said, no, but we will. And we started that. So we had a selection of women. We had field interviews, focus groups, and they came up with what are your needs? And their needs were grouped under 4 categories. Formalization, whether or not, it doesn't necessarily mean they want to be formal, but this is an issue. Let's talk about them as issues. Formalization, the need for capacity building and skill development, access to technology and knowledge, and sociocultural pressures. These were the challenges, all right? So we were taking one at a time and we're delving deeper into that, and right now we're looking at the move to formalization. Do you want to formalize? Do you not want to formalize? What are the challenges there? And this is what the women said. We grouped them under categories. First, financial barriers and access to credit. And I want to tie it with my concluding note. Limited access to credit. They are classified as high-risk borrowers, high interest rates. Why are they high-risk borrowers? I mean, these are women, informal. Look at the layers of problems, right? Of issues. So do they own assets? Inheritance, what happens to women's inheritance? I leave these questions open for you, okay? Inheritance issues, ownership of assets. All of this feed into their ability to receive credit. And I'll talk about this later when I talk about AI. But even on the ground, okay? In times of crisis, remember the COVID cash handouts? There were a number of requirements for that, and there were layers of barriers for a woman who is a domestic helper to achieve any kind of support, or even a woman entrepreneur of the types that we are looking at. If you are invisible in data, you're invisible in policy, and this was mentioned earlier, data invisibility, okay? So in times of crisis, these women do not get any support, as opposed to formal entrepreneurs who may be able to receive some help. Negative perceptions of formalization, they don't want to formalize, they're worried about being surveyed and controlled and having to pay taxes. They are unable to navigate what is required of them, navigating bureaucratic and legal challenges. They say they have low self-esteem. They say, we don't know what to do and we don't think we are qualified enough to measure that, to achieve that. And this increases by the modest educational achievement. So thinking about the supply, and I'll talk about that later. Most importantly, what these women complain of is the social and cultural barriers. Like elsewhere in the Global South, the social norms are very hard on them. It's very difficult for them to do anything but what they are doing, and even when they are working digitally from their home, they are still unable to advance because of the pressures that are put on them. So, and the work-life balance and everything we heard of. So in our current study, we're doing an evaluation of the new reforms, the labor law number 14. And labor law took things a step further. They actually acknowledged gig workers, which I am very proud to claim to have been part of this through our research on gig workers. That's another project where we reached actually the parliament and policymakers, and they now are included in the new labor law. However, they are not, women are not pointed at. It's just gig workers in general. It's a great step in the right direction. However, the new labor law does have anti-harassment clauses and has dedicated a section on the right of women wage earners. But this still, as far as informal work, it is still limited to informal workers in the formal private entities. So there are still things that need to be done. Overhaul or reform, I'm not taking any side, I'm just saying this is our analysis of the law. Also with the social insurance and pensions law, it still takes care of the self-employed workers in the formal sector, but does not really address the women that we are working with. Putting all of this aside, overhaul or not overhaul, women are diverse. There isn't just one type of women's work. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Should we have targeted policies? Should we have new policies? Should we reform? Open question. The Philippines, for example, as an example, took steps, not necessarily legislation, but took very positive steps to benefit the women of the type that we are working with in that project, the digital informal entrepreneurs, capacity building, easing their access to credit, unifying legislation, etc. Again, the question remains open. The point is, it is about the cultural context. This is what needs to be addressed. Whatever action is taken needs to be culturally conscious. The similar thinking comes to our research on feminist AI, on transformative supporting research in transformative technologies that are inclusive. You talked about the education paradox. This is also very clear in the AI field, the STEM paradox, the MENA region overall. You have high percentages of girls in STEM education and very low percentages of girls in STEM work, okay? Why do you think this is the case? I mean, why? It's the reality. Life hits them and they have to take care of, care responsibilities, etc. But it's not only the cause of this problem. The problem has ramifications, because if you unpack the technology, unpack AI, there is data, there is algorithm, and there is outcomes, right? Who writes the algorithm? if women are not working actively in the technology field, right? So there is an absence or a lack in the making of the technology. This is one reason, right? Who designs? But also going back to the, you have to work on the supply of women in that field. But I don't want to ignore demand side, because you talk about feminization of inflation. I would like to see a world where economic harms are not feminized. I don't want to see poverty feminized, inequality feminized. How do we do that? Again, subject of the debate open. But the root of it all are the cultural norms. And it's not just about care work. Okay, I want to talk a bit about the data. I mentioned briefly the data invisibility of women, informal workers, etc. Gig work, women in gig work. You know, the algorithm of the platforms gives bonuses based on the number of hours that are worked, okay? No surprise, of course, women work less hours, duh. And not only that, but they work in, surge hours to make it up, or surge hours at night, dangerous space. That's another layer of harms, etc. But I want to go back to the algorithm. If bonuses are calculated based on the hours worked, women are always at the tail of the list, and they will never get any of those bonuses. Why is that the case? Because they work low hours. Why do they work low hours? Because of the society, okay? It all goes back to cultural norms, okay? So that's one thing. Invisible in data, invisible in policy. Again, social protection. And then, of course, there's the myth of flexibility, which harms them, but that's another story, because they think flexible work is great, but that kind of work that is flexible has a lot of problems: no social protection, no health insurance, and the kinds of problems that I alluded to related to the algorithm, okay? So again, I'm very proud. Our work, we managed to include in the ELMPS, the Egyptian labor market surveys, questions about gig work. So now they are seen in the labor market surveys. In hiring, CVs, when women if the algorithm is used for hiring, women will be at the tail. Why? Because women will have less years of work. Why? For obvious reasons. I want to ask men in the room, but you don't have to raise hands because I don't want to embarrass anyone. How many of you is willing to take paternity leave and let their wife continue to work? Open question, you don't have to raise your hands, right? Thank you. How many employers in Egypt will give paternity leaves? Okay, how many employers in Egypt will count the years that women take off to look after their children into their promotion? And I'm not mentioning which institution. Okay, these are real. I'm giving you real life facts. All right, so it's not just about care work. It is the world of credit. Again, if algorithms are used for credit rating for women, they are at the low, and not just in Egypt, by the way. They're everywhere because of women's ownership of assets. So. When we work with feminist AI, and when people say content is king, I say context is queen. So, so my concluding note in a couple of minutes: whatever route you take, whatever decision you make to bring change, you have to have women at their core. You have to have the enabling environment to address women and work, the supply and the demand. You have to have a gender-sensitive approach, the labor law and the pension law, sure, and education, but also personal status. الأحوال الشخصية, right? Anti-harassment laws. There are layers of circles of laws that need to be addressed. Awareness raising, of course. So whatever action you decide to take, incremental, targeted, overhaul, reform, you need to attack the elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room are the cultural norms, and they will emerge their ugly head in whatever action you need to take, wherever you take, when you think of women and work. The future of work discourse has to take women at their core. When we think of the impact of technology, skills, etc., in the end, the policies have to be, whatever the decision you make, gender sensitive and culturally relevant and responsive. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nagla. You've actually added a very enriched layer to the discussion, so thank you very much for that. I think you've heard a lot. You've heard the presentation from Stefan, setting the scene for everyone. You've heard two teams of students arguing opposite positions on one of the most consequential economic questions facing Egypt right now. You have heard additional student voices add their own insights, and you've heard one of Egypt's leading development economists reflect on the whole conversation and add additional insights that may have not really been covered as part and parcel of the students' presentations. what I want to do now is to open the floor for discussions, points, questions, arguments from the floor. And I don't want to put anyone on a spot, but given that we have international guests, so Professor Harold, I would love it if you can reflect on the arguments that were shared. I think you've seen and heard a lot about Egypt during your stay, and this is one of your final events you're having in Egypt. So I would love to give you a minute or two to reflect on what you've heard and maybe add to the conversation that we're having.
Yeah, so fascinating. I didn't know anything about female labor force participation before, so I should have been in the category where it said 0%. I'm sorry I didn't answer all the questions because I didn't know the answers to the others. But I hear a lot of agreement, by and large, about the situation. And I'm somebody that likes controversy, right? To just throw in a monkey wrench into the debate as it is. Because I think by taking a very different position by controversy, maybe solutions emerge by just reflecting on this. So let me start, thinking about female labor force participation and whether it's a good thing or not. And let me read out some countries that rank particularly highly on labor force participation worldwide. I just checked this. So there's Nigeria, which has 80% labor force participation. Tanzania, also 80%. North Korea, 78%, Uganda, 76%, Eritrea, 72%, Liberia, 72%, and there are a few more countries like that. Now, I guarantee you that Egypt doesn't want to be any of these countries because any of these countries have a GDP per capita that's not even half of Egypt. I think the highest one is maybe just about $1,400 per month. So I think the idea that female labor force participation and GDP per capita is correlated doesn't strike me as very evident from these numbers. It's just something to think about. Why is labor force participation so high in these countries, and is that actually a good thing? Now, the second thing, I fully agree that cultural norms must be the culprit. If you look at the MENA countries, all the MENA countries, by and large, have a very low labor force participation. Egypt, if anything, I mean, I also just checked this, and you know these numbers better than I do, seems to be ranking slightly higher than other countries in the MENA group, but overall it's low. It's sort of around 20%. So it's clear it's social norms. Now, there are two ways of thinking about it. One is, let's re-educate people, but I'm always very nervous about re-educating people, about changing their minds and about changing their cultures. And countries that have tried that, usually that ended in disaster. So cultural norms change over time, so there's no doubt about it, and you have debate about this. But there are 50% men and there are 50% women in the country, and the social norms are by all of them together. So whether that should be changed or not, I'm just very nervous to say it needs to be changed because that's the choice of the people. That's what people want. Now, one of the interesting developments that I saw is that indeed female labor force participation declined in this country, and it seems to have to do with the retrenchment of the public sector. And some people said that that's a bad effect. Now, of course, in the public sector, you don't care about revenue, right? I mean, by definition. But in the private sector, you have to. We had a business school. I see many women in the audience. I hope many of them become CEOs and in charge of hiring and so forth. And I guarantee you, when you sit down and you decide to hire the next person for a position and you have a female and a male there, the thought will cross through your mind. Who is going to be more effective at the job? You want to hire somebody who you think is hungry for a career, who is maybe hanging on in the evening for the extra hour, who wants to achieve a path and is not going to drop out after a few years because he wants to be at home with the family. These are the social norms, and you recognize that, of course, as an employer. And as a result, economically, it would not be sensible for you as a female CEO in charge of hiring to hire the women if the women demand as much as a wage as men. I mean, that's the reality of the job market. It's just something to think about. And that's why I also think these equal pay laws ultimately backfire the women. I think you explained it very beautiful. The labor market is already broken, and if you impose equal pay laws, it makes the matter maybe only worse than better. They sound nice, but there's always a side effect of these types of laws that one needs to think about, the unintended consequences. Now, I want to remark on one last item which surprised me the most, which is the educated women. You documented, I thought your slides were fascinating. I'd like to have the slides, by the way, because I thought they were so well done and so informative. I was struck by the fact that in particular the highly educated women are the ones with the highest unemployment rate. Now, maybe that's how it's measured in the data, but it's surprising, right? We talked about childcare and the cost of childcare, and of course, you know, if you can't afford the childcare, why should you go and take a paid job, right? It's cheaper for the family to stay at home, take care of the child. But if you're a highly educated woman, presumably that's much less of a question. You can find child, you can find affordable childcare, you can find people that take care of your children. Also, the question about the safety on transportation, which of course is an issue that the public sector should solve. You know, I mean, that's an obvious one. But imagine many of these women live in, I don't know, maybe New Cairo, and they have their own car. So I can't really imagine that to be an issue for them. So maybe if there's a research unit asking these women, why are they not in the labor force? Now, you mentioned maybe they study fields that don't pay so much, like humanities and so forth, and I think that's maybe right. I mean, nothing probably prevents these women by law. You know, they could study computer science and engineering and medicine, other professions that pay more. The social norms maybe push against that, I get that. But it seems to me that for some reason, it's the highly educated women that in the end decide not to participate in the labor force. And that I find deeply puzzling, because it seems like they're in a good position to do that, right? They can afford the childcare, they can afford safe transportation and so forth. And they probably have a husband, presumably with values that, let's say, differ from the typical norms and might be more open to arrangements that you see more in other countries. Maybe one final remark, if I may. I think labor force participation in the United States and also in Europe has risen partly due to change in norms, but also partly due to what's required in the labor market. I mean, Egypt, I mean, we saw the numbers on construction and transport and so forth. Of course, these are all jobs that require muscle power, right? I mean, if you're in construction, you have to, I don't know, lift stones and so forth. I've not worked in construction, but that's what I imagine these people do. But the workplace has shifted dramatically towards work that requires, you know, thinking, that requires a variety of skills and skills, that requires social skills. Actually, social skills has become enormously important in marketplaces, and some say that women are better at that than women. So there has been, so the male jobs in the United States that relied on muscle power all have disappeared. And so that may be, for those that hope for higher female labor participation in the future, maybe a ray of hope. So thank you. I learned a lot and really glad to be here. And I hope I wasn't too controversial, but I just wanted to throw this out.
Thank you very much. Let me invite other points and comments. Question. Yes, Dr. Abir, please.
Thank you very much for all the speakers. I just have a comment on Hassan and Alaa's presentation. You're partially blaming privatization for the lack of job creation for women, but we have to remember that public sector employment is not usually productive. Especially in Egypt, public sector was ramped with disguised unemployment. So we don't know these women, although they were employed, were they productive or not? So I think blaming privatization is not the correct way to frame this problem.
Thank you, Dr. Abir. Dr. Mona, please.
Hello, thank you, Dina. Mona Saeed, labor economist and professor here at AUC, and I'm you know, first of all, most of the students are my students, and I'm very proud of them. And the whole event, I'm also an ERF fellow, and you know, worked as an intern in the World Bank when I was a graduate student. So you know, I'm very grateful for all the contributions. I just wanted to directly answer a question that Harold, with his excellent insights, brought in, which is why is it that the highly educated women are the ones who end up being unemployed? And the point linking to everything that is said is that the jobs are scarce, those type of jobs. This transition to knowledge intensive and levels of jobs that require this high education are scarce. And when employers see men or women, they prefer the men for the reasons that were cited here, in the private sector. Yes, teachers. Yeah, very right. Teaching, nursing, these have been contracting. Public spending on education and on health in Egypt has really declined, and no matter what, the private sector and privatization are only catering for a very small part of the market, again, for other problems. So definitely one direction for, it's a no-brainer that increasing jobs in the traditionally female-dominated sectors, health and education, whether by the public sector, whether by the private sector, is the way to go, and there are many disincentives against it. I just want to also kind of come to the defense of Ala and Hassan, and I think you said something very good about the shift from the public sector to the private sector, that there was no impact assessment. It wasn't done, it was just simply done by attrition. People who reached retirement, there was new blood to replace them. That's how they really, so in order to minimize public discontent about it, right? So this is not the right way, and of course it was very gender insensitive. And it's not too late to try to take some of your excellent insights that I learned from in the coming period that I hope many people here would be able to take into account. Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions? Yes, Jana, please. Before we go back to the voting, so I hope Namis is ready with the next set of questions. Jana, please.
I have a question for the experts on the floor. So we all know that the best approach to any macroeconomic issue is a multifaceted one, and that the main factor is coordination. So my question is, why not do both? Why not work on the constraints and change reforms, assuming that we have the budget and the budget and the resources, because we're working on the long term, because this is for long-term solutions. So why not?
I will refrain from answering this question myself for one reason. They're all in my class, and this is the kind of discussions we have there. So I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Stefano or Dr. Nagla to maybe add to this.
Without being too facetious about it, precisely because there's a budget constraint. So I mean, that's what all economic classes teach you, right? It's when we don't live in a world of infinite resources. But again, we're not trying to settle the dispute between the left and the right. But there's an element of both, that there are a number of important reforms that are underway, and more needs to be done in that space. But there are also blind spots in other aspects that are missing. And I was trying to argue at the beginning, you need something integrated. There's no one binding constraint that you just move that one constraint and you're done.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, but again, I spoke with Dr. Dina prior to the debate because, I think in the end, it's a question of where do you begin? So they're not mutually exclusive. And then, of course, will be the constraints that are there. And I will stop there not to sway the decision one way or the other.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with all that we've heard, let's maybe go through another round of polling. So you're going to see the QR code appearing again on the screen. So please scan it again, or maybe go to the same page where you had it. And you're going to see 3 more questions. Yeah. I think we're ready. This is question 2. Yeah, question 1. Which argument from today's debate did you find most compelling? And I think the 5 arguments that are listed have been covered one way or another within the discussion, within the arguments, within the comments from the floor. So which of these arguments did you find most compelling? I'm surprised by how the results are changing so quickly. So the results are changing for the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, but the first remains very strong. So 52% of attendees are thinking that the care wall and the commute barrier, they mean women cannot reach available jobs. So the role of care, which has been covered extensively in the discussion, and the commute barriers are still dominating in the ideas that are shared. The next arguments, I would say, reforms need a 2nd generation redesign is also receiving a lot of attention. Education parity, proving that supply side works and the problem is demand side incentive design. Privatization is shrinking the public sector where women are concentrated, and inflation has made formal work economically irrational for women. So even though the responses are distributed more or less around the 4 other items, but I do believe that the care wall and the commute barrier are still dominating the discussion to a great extent. It's changing. I think the 2nd generation reform redesign has also been addressed, touching mainly on the care. I'm not seeing this as a different result. I see it actually complementing the result we're having here. We'll close the phones. We'll take the phones away from people. Okay, maybe we can go to the second. I hope this is just a delay in network, not question 2. So question 2 is saying, if Egypt could only do one thing in the next 2 years to increase women's participation in the workplace, what should it be? And most of the answers so far are saying reform the private sector incentives tied to hiring women. I think, Dr. Semer, people have been very much influenced by what you said in your opening remarks, where incentives are very important. So the majority still believe that private sector incentives being tied to hiring women is one of the strongest things that Egypt needs to focus on. But also building a national childcare system, enforcing anti-discrimination provisions in the new labor law, investing in safe, affordable public transport for women, and linking the CBE credit programs and lending guarantees to female hiring targets. So again, we're seeing the private sector, so the results are stable. Private sector incentives are considered the key to the answer, even though I thought we would be shifting to focus more on childcare and safe, affordable public transportation, given the previous answer. But I think when people were put, and this could be one of the answers to Jana's question, when people were put at a question of what they think are the most pressing challenges, but when they are put in a situation of the priority of reforms, the thinking becomes different. So I think in adding to what Mr. Stefan was saying, it's not only the budget constraint, but it's the existence of trade-offs. It's the prioritization of policy making. And I think this is what we are seeing in the difference in the answers between question 1 and question 2 that we're seeing here. For question 3, we're taking you back to the first question, the pre-debate question that we had. Now, 70% are saying no, deeper structural changes are needed. The good part is that the not sure are now 2% only, as opposed to 4%. So, partially, but key gaps remain, 24%. Implementation is the main challenge. It's now becoming 4%. I think if we give Namis some time, she would be able to display the two results of this question, the pre-post debate, to see how actually some ideas might have changed or some ideas have shifted from one part to the other. Until Namis is ready with displaying these results, I think I'd like to share or reflect on some points that have been shared today. And what struck me most, whether reading the essays that were submitted or hearing everyone speaking today, I don't think the diversity of the arguments was that huge. I think everyone was aligned on where the issues are, what the problems are, how can we move forward. So it's the consistency of particular diagnosis that we are seeing across the different arguments. Almost every student, regardless of their ultimate position, and I think this was one challenge as a committee we faced, that everyone was against the key debate question. But when we dig deeper into it, we see that some students have an argument of, no, the reforms are harmful, the reforms need to be replaced altogether. But another side is saying, well, they can be enhanced, they can be complemented. And I think this is the key argument. We're not looking here at a yes or no question, but it's more of how can we approach it with some deeper thinking and some strategic thinking in what we're having. So the supply side of this problem has actually received a lot of attention. Girls' education, literacy rates, legal framework, formal protections have all received a lot of attention in this discussion. And yet, we've seen very striking figures. Egypt does not rank well in women's economic participation, despite the so many efforts that were done with the access to education, and we refer to this as the MENA paradox. The two students' teams offered different answers to that puzzle. So one team said the supply side is necessary but not sufficient. We need a second generation of reforms. The other team said, well, the architecture itself is the problem. And I'll use one of the sentences that was in one of the essays. You cannot redesign the interior of a house whose foundations are pointing in the wrong direction. Both arguments are grounded in evidence. Both arguments identify something real, and this is what I find most intellectually interesting about the debate. They're not mutually exclusive, as Dr. Nagla said. It's entirely possible that the reforms are both insufficient and harmful, and that what looks like a directional disagreement is actually a disagreement about severity and sequence. So I hope Namis is ready with the answers. Okay, so I think the order of things did not really change, but what we're seeing is more people are now saying no, deeper structural changes are needed. So apparently the discussion has managed to shift the attention more towards the additional or the deeper structural changes that are needed. So the arguments have actually moved. We have less people who are unsure, and we also have less people who are saying that partially, but key gaps remain. Even though the ordering of things did not really change, but we are seeing that some shift in the mindset of some people has actually taken place. And again, I'm not going to take this as a winning team or a non-winning team or team number one and team number two. I'll take this as a very intellectual conversation that has actually enforced some ideas for people who are aware of the topic and helped change some mindsets about a topic that not many people were aware of. And I think this was, again, a very intellectual discussion that I'm very proud of the contribution of the students on the so many different forms that we had. So I think it's time now to acknowledge the winning teams. So I'd like to invite Samer, Stefan, and Dr. Nagla so we can actually give some certificates to the students.
Fancy leather.
So let's start with Hassan. Alaa, please. Thank you. Zaina. Adam, so maybe Stefan can go. Yes, I just want to congratulate all four of you. Some thank yous are due before we take a closing group picture. So I'd like to take a moment to thank the people without whom none of this would have been possible. So to my team in the department, Dr. Mona, Dr. Abir, Dr. Yasmin, Hiba, and Amira, you carried the operational weight of this competition and this event from the very first day. And everything that ran smoothly today is because of you. So thank you very much. To the student volunteers who I know have been reshuffling so many commitments and classes, and thank you very much for being here today. You made it very easy for us. To our partners at the Economic Research Forum, Dr. Raed Safadi, Dr. Hiba Hamdousa, Dr. Shireen Ghunaim, and Ms. Namis Nabil. I'm hoping Namis would come out of the control room for people to meet her. So again, thank you very much for this. For the World Bank team, again, Mr. Stefan Gumbert and Ms. Lina Abdel Ghaffar. So both teams were actually such a delight to work with. It was very important to actually emphasize the weeks and days and I don't know, the meetings that we had to make sure the event is coming out with this quality. I think the collaboration with both institutions is very important. I will re-emphasize the bridge. I will re-emphasize this kind of collaboration. It's very important. To Dr. Nagla, thank you very much for reading the essays on such a short notice. Thank you very much for that. And for all the students who submitted essays to this competition, whether you presented today or not, whether you are in this room or not, and for all the students who participated in the discussion today, thank you for your serious engagement. I now announce this event closed. So we'll take a group picture and you can join us for refreshment. I think what we can have is a group picture with the winners, and then maybe we can turn and ask everyone to stand up so we can take a group picture with the room as well.